What if our understanding of the Bible, and really of Christian origins itself, is kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, but with a huge central piece just gone? And what if finding that missing piece changes the entire picture? Today, we're diving into the work of scholar Margaret Barker. She argues that a suppressed mystical tradition from Israel's first temple is the key to unlocking the whole thing. So let's start putting the pieces together.
And this quote from Barker really sets the stage perfectly. It's a pretty bold claim, right? That an entire system of belief, this powerful spiritual tradition, has been hiding in plain sight, scattered in fragments and shadows throughout texts we thought we knew so well. And if she's right, well, that changes everything. All right, so here's our roadmap for this journey. We're going to start by really defining the problem. Then look at the foundational evidence for this mysticism in the prophet Isaiah. From there, we'll try to figure out why it was suppressed, how early Christians brought it back, and explore the hidden library of texts that kept it alive. And finally, we'll see how this one big idea forces us to reread the entire story.
The way Barker puts it, trying to understand early Christianity without this context is like trying to build a jigsaw puzzle without the picture on the box. You might have a lot of the pieces, sure, but you have no idea how they fit together, or even if they all belong to the same puzzle in the first place. Now, let's be really clear here. Temple mysticism isn't some doctrine you can just look up in a book. It's a scholarly hypothesis. It's a reconstruction. It's the picture that starts to emerge when you gather all these seemingly disconnected clues and realize, wait a minute, they actually form a coherent system. A system that just might answer some of the biggest questions we have about the Bible. So, this means we have to put on our detective hats. We're not just reading these texts at face value. We're listening for echoes. We're digging into the assumptions underneath the words. And we're piecing together a worldview that, for one reason or another, was intentionally covered up or simply forgotten over time. So, where do we start? Well, our investigation kicks off with the earliest datable piece of evidence we have for this whole mystical tradition, a really profound vision that the prophet Isaiah had inside the Jerusalem temple. This right here, this is our foundational blueprint. And this timeline is absolutely crucial. So around 740 BCE, Isaiah has this incredible vision. Then you fast forward over 800 years, and the author of John's Gospel makes this just stunning connection. He says that the glorious, enthroned figure Isaiah saw was Jesus. What that tells us is that the very first followers of Jesus saw him through the lens of this ancient temple vision. So let's break down the anatomy of this mystical experience. Isaiah sees the Lord on a throne. He sees these incredible heavenly beings, the seraphim, a name that literally means the burning ones. He hears the heavenly liturgy, a song that, becomes central to later Christian worship. Then he goes through this purification, almost like a high priest. And finally, he gets a divine commission. This is the archetype, the classic pattern of temple mysticism. And where did all this happen? In a place the text calls the dabeir, what we know as the Holy of Holies. And Barker makes a really key point here. This wasn't just some sacred room. The name itself implies it was an oracle, the specific spot where you could encounter the speaking, visible presence of God on his throne. This was a direct, tangible encounter. Okay, so if this tradition of directly seeing and experiencing God was so central, you have to ask, right? Why isn't it more obvious in the Bible? And this brings us to a major theological conflict that was brewing right inside ancient Israel itself. And you can see this conflict playing out right in the text. I mean, just look at these two verses. On the one hand, you've got this older tradition from Exodus that says, flat out, the elders of Israel saw the God of Israel. But then a later text from Deuteronomy insists, you saw no form. You literally cannot get a more direct contradiction than that. These are two competing theologies at war with each other, right inside the scriptures. And well, the no-form tradition won. This school of thought, what we call the Deuteronic movement, became incredibly influential. And as they edited and compiled the scriptures we have today, they elevated their own theology, which meant that the older, mystical tradition of seeing God was systematically pushed aside, edited, or suppressed. It became a hidden stream of thought. And this is where things get really interesting, because it's precisely these hidden, suppressed threads that the very first Christians picked back up. They wove them into their understanding of Jesus, and in doing so, they created a picture that was both radically new and, at the same time, profoundly ancient. So here's the leap they made.
And it's a huge one. The early Christians took two major figures from the book of Isaiah, the glorious enthroned Lord from chapter 6 and that mysterious suffering servant from chapter 53, and they said, these two, they're the same person. They're both Jesus. This created a direct link between divine glory and human suffering. You know, what's fascinating is how different versions of the same text point to this hidden tradition. The standard Hebrew text we use, the Masoretic, says the servant was marred, disfigured. But older versions, like the ones they found at Qumran and in the Greek Septuagint, have a reading that means anointed. So his appearance isn't disfigured, it's transfigured. And where the standard text is silent, these older versions say that after all his suffering, he shall see the light, a clear reference to a vision of heavenly glory.
And all of this reveals a very clear pattern, a pattern that gets echoed in that famous early Christian hymn in Philippians chapter 2. You have a figure, the servant, who humbles himself, even to the point of death. And, because of that, he is exalted to the highest place, given the divine name itself, Yahweh, and worshipped by all creation. This is the absolute heart of temple mysticism, the transformation of a human being into the divine. It's a concept known as theosis.
Okay, so that leads to a pretty obvious question, right? How did the early Christians even know about these alternate readings and these censored traditions? Well, the answer seems to lie in a vast collection of literature that was deliberately kept secret.
According to the ancient text of 2 Esdras, when the scriptures were being restored by the scribe Ezra, he produced 94 books, but only 24 of them were made public, and that became what we now know as the Hebrew Bible. The other 70 books, the ones containing the spring of understanding and the fountain of wisdom, were to be kept secret, shared only with the wise.
And this wasn't just some legend. We actually have evidence of this kind of institutionalized secrecy. The Mishnah, which is a collection of Jewish oral traditions, explicitly forbids the public reading and explanation of the most mystical temple texts, like Ezekiel's vision of God's chariot throne. This all points to one thing. The most profound teachings were intentionally kept out of the public scriptures.
So who held on to all this forbidden knowledge? Well, it was groups on the margins, the community at Qumran, the people who gave us the Dead Sea Scrolls, and, of course, the early Christians. They became the custodians of the very texts, traditions, and interpretations that had been systematically filtered out of the official mainstream religion of the day.
So when we take this missing piece, this hidden temple mysticism, and we finally place it back into the puzzle, the entire picture of Christian origins, well, it changes dramatically. And this is the core thesis right here. From this perspective, Christianity isn't a brand new religion that just broke away from Judaism. No, instead, it presents itself as a recovery, a restoration of the most ancient, original, mystical faith of Israel, a faith that had been lost and suppressed by later reforms. This new understanding really reframes everything. So, who was Jesus? He was the enthroned Lord that Isaiah saw, and he was the great high priest entering the Holy of Holies. What was the early faith? It was a conscious effort to restore this ancient belief system. And what is Christian worship? It's seen as humans joining the angelic choirs in that continuous heavenly liturgy that Isaiah witnessed all those centuries ago. And that leaves us with one final, and I think pretty provocative question. If this entire mystical framework, something so central to early Christianity, could be hidden in plain sight, suppressed by textual changes and deliberate secrecy, what other hidden things might still be out there, just waiting to be discovered? What else might completely change how we read the texts we thought we knew so well?